testimony. Is the defense prepared to present some part of Dr. Samuel's testimony today?
Can I just have 1 second, Judge?
Yes. All right. Let me just follow up on a couple of objections the state raised earlier. There was an objection to the PowerPoint including some excerpts from a magazine periodical. Are you still urging that objection?
Yes. He indicated that it was anecdotal and that he could just as well relate it to the jury. So that's the basis of the objection.
Judge, that mischaracterizes what was done in the interview. What was done in the interview was basically a cross-examination wherein when Dr. Samuels attempted to explain that he likes to have pictures of the brain up there whenever he teaches, which he does quite often to students, it's helpful for people to understand what he's talking about. He was not allowed to complete his answers, and Mr. Martinez would stop him. So ultimately, that's not true. Dr. Samuels would like to have the pictures because it makes it easier for jurors to understand.
We were talking about the Time magazine.
Right. The brain, is there any objection to the brain?
Other than disclosure issues, no.
All right. I'm going to permit you to use your PowerPoint showing the brain. My concern is the excerpts from the article. I haven't seen them. Are they verbatim? Are they just words and phrases?
They're quotes, basically, and it's basically used for an example to start talking, because we're talking about the brain and what happens to certain areas of the brain when it's under high stress and the physiological changes that occur. The Time magazine article is just an anecdotal example, basically, of what happened to a police officer when he underwent a high period of stress, and that's somebody who's actually specifically trained. Certainly, I know the state has said over and over again that Dr. Samuels can discuss it. He doesn't need the slides, but if he can discuss it, I don't see the reason why there can't be the slide up there as well.
Do you have a copy of the slide?
I don't have a paper copy. I just have it on the...
Can we put it up on the screen?
We have Dr. Samuels coming because he turned his computer off and took...
Please.
Yeah,
Did you want to see them all, or?
No, I just wanted to see the excerpts from Time magazine.
there. Thanks. Your Honor?
Yes.
This is a picture that's not related to the magazine article, but I have two quotes from the magazine article. Should I go to those?
Yes, please. Is there another one?
Next one. That's it, Your Honor. Just another picture of the brain.
Ms. Lamont, before these slides are shown, I assume there will be some testimony.
Yes, Judge, we were going to lay foundation as to the physiological changes in the brain and things like that.
All right. Before you show the slides, let me know so that we can have a bench conference to discuss the admissibility. I think I need to hear that testimony before I can rule on the admissibility.
Okay.
All right. Anything else before we bring in the jury?
This one.
I'm sorry, Judge.
I said, is there anything else before we bring in the jury?
Not from us.
With regard to the two issues involving instrumental murder and expressive murder, there will be an evidentiary hearing. We will either do that this afternoon or tomorrow, depending on how far we get today.
Judge can.
So the record is clear. The court is going to permit the brain diagram to be used by Dr. Samuels. The court finds this diagram will assist the jury in understanding Dr. Samuels' testimony. With regard to the PowerPoint, I do intend to advise the jury by giving them a limiting instruction on the use of the PowerPoint. I'm going to advise the jury that they may consider the PowerPoint during the testimony of the witness. It may be used to assist them in understanding the testimony of the witness. It will not go back to the jury room during deliberations. And a copy will be marked and preserved for possible appeal purposes, so you'll need to provide one to the clerk.
Trying to get to the main screen on this so that I can. Oh, it's already on.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ms. Wilmot, you may call the next witness.
Thank you. Defense calls Dr. Richard Samuels.
Dr. Samuels, please come forward to be sworn right up here, please.
Raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Could you tell us your name, please?
Richard M. Samuels.
And I called you doctor. Are you a doctor?
I am.
All right, let's start with that. What are you a doctor of?
I have a PhD in biopsychology.
Okay, and what does that mean?
That means after completing my master's degree, prior to that a bachelor's degree, and prior to that an associate's degree, I completed my studies at the City University of New York in psychology with a submajor rather, in biopsychology. So it was more of a biological basis of behavior background.
Okay. Did I give you enough time to get comfortable up there?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about your education then, okay?
Sure.
You said you got your doctorate in New York?
Yes.
And what happens when you get your doctorate? Do you have to do any further training?
Well, it depends what you want to do with your degree afterwards. In my particular case, I did an internship, a clinical internship, at the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in Piscataway, New Jersey. And I spent a year there being supervised by therapists and clinicians, taking additional courses, as well as getting my feet wet doing psychotherapy.
And a clinical internship, what exactly are you doing?
Well, during that period of time, we attend classes. We see patients, just a few at a time, and we are supervised by the staff, by people that have had much more experience, obviously, than I did at the time. And the process goes on like that, building up your clinical skills and developing a sense of confidence working with patients, discussing the approaches that you're using, getting feedback from the supervisors with respect to the techniques that are being used, and basically becoming comfortable being on your own at some point, seeing patients.
Okay, and you said you did that for a year?
I did that for a year, and then after that, I went to the New Jersey Medical School.
It appears that he's looking at something. If that's the case, can we know what that is?
Yes, sir. Are you looking at a document?
I'm looking at my CV.
If we just have that marked as an exhibit, and he can refer to it at that point.
Do you have a copy to mark as an exhibit?
I may. Is that copy?
You're welcome to this after I finish looking at it. It's a little annotated, but you're welcome to it. Can I show it to you?
We will mark that copy
Sure.
and hand it back to you.
Sure. Hold on.
Does it help you to remember?
Well, it's pretty lengthy, so I usually skip things.
I just asked what year was this when you were doing your clinical internship?
The clinical internship occurred in 1974 or 5.
Okay, so looking at your CV, does that help you remember exactly what you did in
Yes.
terms of education?
Sure.
All right. So after that year of clinical internship, you were telling us what you did next.
Then I went to the New Jersey Medical School and was appointed to the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And I was the first PhD student to enter their postdoctoral fellowship program. This one was in human sexuality. And during the year and a half that took, I studied with gynecologists, psychiatrists, urologists, specialists in the field, Masters and Johnson, other people well known at the time, and learned how to do sex therapy, which was very popular at that time.
Okay.
And then after that, I took another year of supervised supervision, another year of supervision, so that I would qualify for later board examinations.
Okay, and what, a year of supervision in what, clinical?
In clinical.
Clinical psychology?
Yes, clinical psychology.
All right. And after, do you have to do any more of your clinical rotations like that after that?
Well, after I finished those, I would attend seminars, classes. More recently, we do online work, consult with peers, and so forth. But those were the years of my most intensive training.
Okay, and out of those intense training, you end up with a PhD.
Well, the PhD is actually granted before then, but before you can become licensed, you have to have your internship. Before you can get an advanced diplomate diploma, which I've achieved, you need additional supervision beyond that. But I also did the postdoctoral fellowship, which is considered a degree higher than a PhD.
Okay, and that you said was in sex therapy?
Human sexuality.
Sexuality, sorry. All right, and so after all of this, you talked about getting a license?
My first license to practice psychology independently was in the state of New Jersey in 1975.
All right, and you said something about taking boards. What is that?
Yes. As you advance in the field with additional training, additional testing, you can get what's called a diplomate diploma. Only about 5% of practicing psychologists ever achieve that level. And so I enrolled in classes, and I had to undergo an examination, a interview by 6 of my peers, a presentation of a case, and so forth, and I was finally granted the diplomate in clinical psychology in 1980.
Okay. And is that something you have to keep up, or once you have it, you have it?
Well, once you have it, you have it. But on the other hand, in order to renew your license, you need to take a certain number of continuing education credits, which I have been able to do.
All right. And is that what you're talking about when you say that you go to seminars and online?
That's right.
Also?
Yes.
All right. With regard to education, have we hit all of the education?
That's pretty much it.
Okay. So once you're licensed and you are licensed as a clinical psychologist, where do you work? What do you do?
Well, in New Jersey, I kept a position with the medical school, and I became the co-director of the state's first clinic for sex therapy, for doing sex therapy for married couples. After several years, I had the opportunity to go into private practice, and eventually we had 3 different offices to treat sexual dysfunction. But in my role at the medical school, I also became the director of the state's first and only gender dysphoria clinic, which now is referred to as transgender clinic. And I worked with about 150 different patients who had that particularly difficult problem.
And let me interrupt you for a second. What timeline are we talking about now?
This is now going into the late 70s into the early 80s.
Okay. All right, and then so after that, where were you? How long did you stay in the private practice?
I was in private practice in New Jersey until about 1993, 94, and I was involved in a couple of other psychology-related business ventures, but I moved out to Arizona full-time about 7 years ago, although I had been commuting back and forth between here and New Jersey since 1989, and I saw clients here. Here in Arizona, I did only forensic work. Back in New Jersey, I finished up with some patients I had, conducted some of the business that I had, and did forensic work back there in New York and New Jersey.
Okay. And you talked about you had some other psychological ventures?
Yes.
What were those?
We have a company that's called Guardian Elder Care. We provide psychologists and social workers to nursing homes and long-term care facilities to provide psychological counseling for elderly people.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, that was out back there, back in New Jersey. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anything else in New Jersey then?
That's pretty much it.
Okay. When you in New Jersey, did you ever do any work with the government?
Yes, actually, I did, and I'm sorry I forgot that. I had worked as a consultant to various police departments and also to the state police. And I worked with clients of theirs, officers, who were involved in shooting incidents and who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I did a fairly large number of psychological evaluations, saw some of them as patients in my practice, would clear them for going back to work if that was the case, or would help them go through disability. Many police officers who accidentally or perhaps in the line of duty killed someone with their gun or whatever, developed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and many of them couldn't function. I got those guys, and at that time they were only men, and helped to either evaluate them or to get them back on their feet.
All right, and did you do any court-appointed work in New Jersey?
Yes, actually in New Jersey I did a lot of court-appointed work. On many of these state police cases, I would be court-appointed to do the evaluation and to sometimes follow through with therapy. I did work in the custody area, and I would be court-appointed for that. I've done work in the...
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you for a second. When we say court-appointed, can you explain to us what that means?
Well, it's a little bit different in New Jersey than it is from here, but sometimes either it would be the nature of the case or the fact that the prosecutor and the defense attorney were able to get together and agree that instead of having separate evaluations, one for each side, they would agree on an evaluator, and that evaluator would be appointed by the court, and it would become a neutral evaluation, and the report would go to the judge.
And is that what you're talking about with the kind of work you did in New Jersey?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying that you did this type of work for custody cases?
Custody cases, other kind of domestic violence cases. I did a lot of medical malpractice cases as well, but those were not court-appointed usually. But I did a lot of forensic work back east.
All right, and forensic work, is that what you would consider forensic work, the court appointments? The
court appointments, yes. Or sometimes I would be retained by either the prosecution or by the defense.
Okay.
Cases.
Does that cover New Jersey?
Pretty much.
Okay. And you said you moved out to Arizona.
Moved out to Arizona.
And when was that? I knew you were going back and forth for a while.
Yeah. I think we first came out here in about 86, 88. I don't remember the date exactly. But I commuted for 13 years, 2 weeks in New Jersey, 2 weeks here. And the attempt was to build up a practice here and conclude my business in New Jersey. It took a lot longer than I had anticipated, but eventually I was able to move out here, and I've been here full-time, I think around 6 or 7 years.
Okay. And what kind of practice did you build here in Arizona?
Forensic only.
Okay.
I only do forensic cases here, no therapy.
Okay. Is there a reason for that?
Well, the reimbursement rates were a lot lower out here, and I had done therapy for about 34 years, so I had enough.
You had enough?
I had enough.
Okay. And so how many years then have you been doing forensic work in Arizona?
Well, since I moved out here. In fact, I think I had my first case in '89 here.
All right. And forensic work in Arizona, is it similar to what you were talking about in New Jersey with the court appointments?
Not as much, no. I have been court appointed, particularly in Yuma County, but less so in Maricopa County.
All right.
I began doing my work primarily in the area of psychosexual risk assessments and sexually violent perpetrator cases, because that was my specialty area, and I fit right into that area.
All right. And did you do other types of cases as well?
Yes, I've done a number of criminal cases, some murder cases. I've done some restoration work.
What's restoration?
Restoration is if a patient is deemed to be mentally unfit, or if they have an emotional problem, we make a determination and they can go to the state hospital where they are restored to the point where they can go back to trial. So I've done some cases for that, and that was court appointed in Yuma County.
Okay. And so when you're doing forensic work here in Arizona, who do you particularly work for, one side or the other, defense or prosecution?
Most of the time I've been hired by the defense.
Okay. And when the defense hires you, well, let me ask you this. Have you ever turned down a case?
I've turned down a few cases when I felt that I couldn't help them. And sometimes I would begin an evaluation by interviewing someone, and I could see I was not going to be able to help the attorney, and I would inform them of such, and then it was their option as to whether or not they wanted me to write a report or just stop the case to save money at that point.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I want to talk to you a little bit what you've done in this particular case for Jodi. Do you remember when you were hired?
Yes, I believe that I was hired prior to December 16th, 2009.
Okay. And when you're hired, what's your understanding of what you're supposed to do?
Well, first I discussed the case with the attorney. In this case, it was Mr. Nurmi. And he gave me a background of what had happened, asked me if I would be interested in the case, and I was. And then at some point thereafter, I had my first meeting with Ms. Arias.
All right.
And I went in, as I typically do, to get an overall global view. I have found that that style has worked best for me in doing evaluations. I just don't do a linear reporting. I try to develop a rapport. I try to make the person feel comfortable with me, and I find that that extracts the most accurate information.
Okay.
I did meet with Miss Arias a dozen times.
12 times?
12 times
Okay.
over a 3-year period.
All right. In your first couple of meetings with her, you talked a little bit about how you take a global approach. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean? From a psychological standpoint?
Yes. I knew this was going to be difficult for her, and so I skirted around the actual events that created this issue, found out a little background information about her. She told me the original story about the 2 intruders. I didn't push that point.
When you say you didn't push that point, you mean you didn't confront her about it?
I didn't confront her with it, no, not the first couple of times.
Okay.
And got that information, got some background information, tried to make her feel more comfortable with me. After all, I was a stranger, and I was asking her the most intimate details of her life. And so when you work in a clinical setting, you try to develop rapport with your clients and develop a sense of trust. And this is how I handle cases of this nature. When we have the opportunity to meet with the client over a period of time, and that's what I did.
Okay. And during these meetings, do you record what you're saying?
No, I never record.
Okay.
And the
What do you
reason
do?
for that is very clear. People are very reluctant to get their words recorded. And I used to do that when I did therapy, but that always inhibited a person. Very rarely do I record an interview session for that reason.
All right. Do you write down what people are saying?
I write down. The downside of not recording it is that you have to write very quickly. And sometimes a word or two is missed, and I have to get it the next time I go in. But we had the luxury of several different visits. So what I refer to that as a process of successive approximations, and that's just the style that I've developed over the years.
Okay. And what type of conversations are you having? You mentioned not linear. So what does that mean to you when you're taking?
I basically ask her what's on her mind today, what she'd like to talk about. I usually have my agenda, some areas that I want to explore, and I will get into those areas. If I had a question about the previous interaction, I will refine my questions and try to get out the information. And you can easily tell what's the most difficult for the individual because they skirt around that particular issue. And that allows me to develop an approach later on down the line to finally get that information.
Okay. After these meetings with Ms. Arias, do you eventually write a report?
Yes, eventually I write a report.
And is that report, what do you write that report on, based from?
Well, the report is a function of the interviews, a review of the case material, and in this case it was voluminous. I read somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 pages of her diaries, which began either in junior high school or high school. I don't recall exactly. I reviewed the police reports. I looked at the crime scene photographs. I interviewed her, read some newspaper accounts, and pretty much, then I administered a couple of psychological tests to help me with my diagnosis. The 2 tests that I chose to use were the Milan Clinical Multi-Axel Inventory, which is a standardized paper and pencil test that is scored by a computer algorithm, and I use it as a sort of a second opinion because I have no control over how it's going to be scored. And that provides an output which I incorporated into my report.
Okay. And in your report, Dr. Samuels, so you're taking all of this information that you've read through, right? And then the information of meeting with Miss Arias, you said. Do you use any clinical things? I don't know what the proper term, but the DSM-4.
Well, being trained in psychology, you tend to look at the world with a clinical eye. But yes, the idea for me here was to come up with a diagnosis. And so each time I spoke with her, I tried to refine certain areas. I tested hypotheses using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as my guide. I also reviewed many raw footage of I think it was 48 Hours or 2020 program, and interviews, the recordings of messages and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of information in this case. So putting that all together, I wrote my report.
Okay. And you talked about when you're taking notes that you have to write very fast.
I do, yeah.
And do your notes then, when you're going to write down your report, are you looking through all your notes?
Yes, it's a little more difficult to do it than if I had done it in a linear fashion, because I have to go back and forth and find out where a piece of information is. But that's just the way that I've been trained, and that's how I do it. It's not quite as efficient as some other methods, I guess.
And when you, as a psychologist, and when you're making a diagnosis, are specific dates, in particular to Ms. Arias' case, are specific dates important to you?
Sometimes they are, but most of the time the specific details and dates aren't quite as important. Obviously, dates surrounding the primary event are important. But a day or two off usually doesn't matter that much to me. Now, it may to a detective, but it doesn't affect me that much.
Okay, and is that part of the global take that you do?
That's right. It's a global approach.
Okay. And after you finished your report, did you ever make an addendum?
I did.
And what was that for?
The addendum was made because new information came to light from, I believe, a hard drive and some letters that was in question. So I reviewed that material and I wrote an addendum to my report, because at the time that I wrote the report, I did not have that new material.
All right.
You may continue.
All right, and in that addendum, did you change your opinion at all?
No, it reinforced my opinion.
All right. And when you have additional information, is it important for you to look at that additional information in forming an opinion?
Absolutely. The more pieces of the puzzle you have, the more complete the image.
Okay. You mentioned that when you first met Ms. Arias that she was talking about the intruder story.
Yes.
Okay. And you said you didn't confront her about that?
Not initially, no.
Why initially? Why is that?
Well, that was a story, and I wanted to see if it would change at all, which it did not. And so Mr. Nurmi and I went to her and explained the importance of...
Well, let me stop you there.
Yes, okay.
Did you eventually confront her?
We did.
Okay. And during the time period that you saw her, did she eventually stop talking about the intruder story?
Yes.
All right. And then did she tell you what we now know, what she says happened on June 4th?
Yes.
Okay. And after she told you what happened on June 4th, did you ever feel the need to confront her again?
Not on that, no.
Okay. No. During the first sessions when you're talking to her, when she's telling you the intruder story, did you get the feeling that she wasn't being completely forthcoming?
Did I get the feeling she wasn't being forthcoming? I had suspicions that that was the case, yes.
And is that something that happens when you meet somebody for the first time, a new patient for the first time?
I've had patients that I've worked with for a year that haven't told me the whole story. So yes, this is not at all unusual.
And is that part of establishing a rapport with her?
That's correct.
And when you establish a rapport with someone, is that something where, is that establishing a trust also?
Yes.
And let's see. When you first met Miss Arias, what was she like as far as self-esteem, her confidence level?
Well, initially, and from the beginning, it became clear to me that she had some difficulties with...
Foundation. I know he said when he first, but then he said in the beginning, if we could just narrow it down to whatever time they were 10 times.
Sustained.
When you first met her in 2009?
I felt that she was a woman with low self-esteem. I saw her as relatively, pretty much of a pacifist, and I had read all of her writings by that point. I realized she was confused. I suspected that there was more to the story than she first revealed. And of course, that expressed some concern to me. In order to do a proper evaluation, you have to confront eventually stories that may seem to be improbable.
Okay. Did you notice any change in her self-esteem from then until more recently? And when
Yes.
I say more recently, for foundation's sake, let's talk about the end of last year.
Yes, the end of last year. I found her to be more confident and more in control of her feelings, more positive about her life. She was very depressed when I first met her, and she talked about suicide and so on. And so that depression seemed to have lifted to a large degree by the last time I had seen her.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about memory.
Sure.
Okay? You said that you have a degree, your degree is in biopsychology?
Biopsychology.
Okay. Does that have anything to do with the brain and physiological things?
Yes, I used to teach physiological psychology to undergraduates and graduate students at various times. In more recent years, the past 6 years or so, I was the director of cognitive science for a company called Brain Savers. And that is a company that was developed by neurologist Paul Benheim, who is here in Arizona, to provide educational programs and cognitive exercise programs for the elderly in the nursing homes. And I've had an interest in that for many, many years. We actually put together a book that Dr. Benheim authored, in which we wrote rather clearly, but in a simplistic way, about the functioning of the brain, the formation of memories, how memories can be distorted, how they cannot form. And so that way I have enhanced my ability to converse about the human brain and memory.
All right. I'm sorry, you said that you also taught?
Yes, I taught at the New Jersey Medical School. I taught at the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology. I taught at the City University of New York.
Okay.
At various times.
Okay. And just a degree in psychology itself, do you learn anything about the brain with psychology?
Yes, absolutely. It's part of the curriculum because, after all, what is behavior but the function, the expression of what goes on in the brain? So that's core to psychology. In fact, psychology is considered the study of behavior, and behavior emanates from the brain. So obviously, we need to know it. We don't treat brain disorders, but we help people with an understanding of how the brain functions.
Okay. Judge, may we approach? May. With slides to help us understand
Yes.
the function of memory?
Yes.
And do you think that PowerPoint, the pictures, will that assist the jury in understanding your explanation of how memory works?
I would hope so, otherwise I wouldn't be doing my job as an educator.
All right. If I can just have a moment, Judge.
Ladies and gentlemen, with regard to the PowerPoint presentation, you may consider the PowerPoint presentation during the testimony of this witness. It is being provided to assist you in understanding his testimony. You will not receive a copy of the PowerPoint presentation to take with you into the jury room when you deliberate.
Oh, sorry.
May I publish it to the jury? Thank you. I think the word missing. Oh. All right. Can you tell us, you want to tell us a little bit about how our memory works and how it's formed?
Yes. The human brain is an incredibly complex organ. And in the last 10 or 15 years, neuroscientists have undergone an enormous amount of research to the point where we're now beginning to understand how memories are formed, how they're stored, how they're transformed. We still have a long way to go, but we do know enough that I can make statements with certainty because this material is readily available in the literature and it is accepted as being factual to the point where our information and our knowledge stops. So what I have done here to clarify this for you is on this, yeah, there it is. Okay, on the screen is a cross-section of the brain. If I took my brain and sliced it this way, you would have an opportunity to see the different layers of the brain because the brain consists of many layers. These portions of the brain in this area here is referred to as the old brain because all vertebrates, which means snakes, reptiles, amphibians, crocodiles, birds, monkeys, dogs, cats, and human beings all have this same, very similar, these same structures. These structures form the basis of our emotions, which occurs in the amygdala. In the hippocampus is where memories are formed. The reason that it looks like, the reason that we call it a hippocampus is that Greek scientists noted, even back then, that the structure inside of the brain looked like a seahorse. And so hippocampus means seahorse in Greek. And scientific studies now show that the amygdala is the center of emotion, that all the emotions that we have are mediated in this very small section of the brain, deep within the size of the inside of the brain. Whereas the hippocampus, which we see here, is where memories are stored. How do we know that? We know that because in people with injuries or in animal studies where those areas are deliberately damaged, new memories are very difficult, if not impossible, to form. An animal won't learn the task. People with Alzheimer's disease show a shrinkage of the hippocampus, and we believe that that's why they don't remember recent things, whereas things that they remembered years and years ago, which have already been coded and stored somewhere else in the brain, have no difficulty being retrieved. Now, the difference between the human brain is that we have a lot of what's called the gray matter. This is the cerebral cortex. We're not interested in that today, but the cerebral cortex is where reasoning occurs, where inspiration occurs, where our language takes place, and so on. But we're mainly concerned here. We know that the hippocampus is extremely sensitive to stress. And when the hippocampus is not operating correctly, memories cannot be formed. Stress occurs in situations that we call fight or flight. If you've ever been in a car where you had a near miss, or you've had a car accident, or God forbid, something even worse than that, some sort of an accident or a real tragedy, you know the feelings of your heart beginning to pound away. You know that you might feel hot or even cold and clammy. Your respiration begins to increase. This is a result of stress impacting on the brain, primarily first through the amygdala, which is here, seat of emotion, which also will have effect on your ability to remember things that occurred during that period of time.
Can you tell us a little bit about the physiological aspects? So what happens when you let's say, stick with a car accident. What happens is our physiological changes.
Well, perhaps I can refer to the article, or not.
Let me talk a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more first
Sure.
about the amygdala. Does it do something? You were talking about having cold sweats or having that feeling where your arms get heavy right after an adrenaline rush.
Yes.
What causes that?
Okay. What happens is that when we sense danger, an automatic protective system begins to occur, and we call that as the body is going from what's called a parasympathetic state, which is a state that body is in when we're calm, to a sympathetic state, which is what's referred to as the fight or flight state, where the body prepares to fend off harm, to protect itself, to survive, most important thing. You see this in animals, and you see this in humans as well.
So what happens when the body goes into this mode?
Well, first of all, the amygdala releases a whole bunch of hormones, which begins to put the body into a protective mode. Glucose is released to power the major muscle areas for self-defense and for running. That's why we call it fear or fight or flight. So the muscle groups get energized. Adrenaline is pumped into the system, which improves our alertness and also adds to our ability for strength. We've all heard of people being able to do inhuman-like tasks. A woman whose child is crushed by a car lifts the car. We hear stories like that. And it's possible due to the additional glucose and due to the adrenaline pumping through the body. The problem that occurs for the hippocampus is that the presence of the adrenaline begins to shut this area down because the brain is not interested in remembering what's going on. The brain is interested in survival. And so all our energies are focused on self-protection. We don't start thinking about, oh, what a beautiful color my attacker is wearing. We don't think about that. We don't think about, what song I would like to have played at my funeral. We don't think about that. We simply we fight for our lives or we flee from the scene. That's all that happens, whether you're a rat, an alligator, or a human being. It's the same thing that happens.
So are you saying that there's a I just lost it. Are you saying that there's a physiological reason, these chemicals that are flooding from the amygdala to the hippocampus? So is that something that can ever be controlled?
No, it can't be controlled. It's part of our built-in protective system, and I'm sure it's helped to propagate the species over the eons, We're very fortunate the system works that way.
And so with the hippocampus shut down, then is that not, even though something is happening before our eyes, is it that it's not being retained?
That's correct. In fact, we know, and it's clear from the research, that a large percentage of individuals who are in such settings do not remember or have cloudy and foggy memories of what has transpired because the brain is not able to process through the hippocampus that information. We are more concerned with survival. And that's it. This happens in all creatures.
All right, Judge, may we approach?
You may. may continue.
Dr. Samuels, have you run into examples of this type of flooding, the amygdala and flooding and the hippocampus shutting down?
Oh, yes.
And have you had examples from your own practice, working with police officers?
Well, definitely.